Welcome to Windows on the World, and this show is going out live from where I am, but it's being recorded and will be uploaded a bit later because I'm in a place with a 6-hour time difference to the UK, and over the forthcoming weeks I will be travelling about and doing shows from different parts of the world. Well, a few different parts of the world, and that's why this show tonight is going to be uploaded onto Spreaker, and I will probably be in chat a bit later on. If anybody's out there listening and wants to get involved in chat, please do, because there are always people in chat on Sunday, and it's a good place to exchange ideas and meet people. So this week we're going to start off with the Yellow Vests in its 11th week. And we are being told that the Yellow Vests are expressing views that, get this, both far left and far right. Well, it started out far right, didn't it? So in other words, if you've got demands against the government, then that's far right. Or is it far left? Well, they can't seem to make their minds up now. But it might be time the media did make up their minds on how to categorise them. But get this, we're going to start with controlled opposition. Now, that's one of our speciality subjects, actually, because we've been covering it for years. It reaches out to so many areas, and the latest news on the controlled opposition front is that the Yellow Vests in France have a counter-protest group which has suddenly appeared, called the Red Scarves, who claim to be protesting for Republican liberties. Now, they state that the Yellow Vests have dominated the national conversation for too long. Can you get your head around this? It's absolutely incredible, right? We demand, they state, that the representatives of the state maintain the state of law. So this is basically, obviously, the police state actually using their own globalist, anti-globalist ideology. In other words, they're just trying to bring in this controlled opposition group. But it's a little bit late for that now, isn't it? Now, apparently 26,000 people have expressed an interest in the Sunday March. I think it's this Sunday on Facebook. Be really interesting to see how many people turn up to that and what actual effect it does have. But you can bet that the media will be promoting it in some way or other. Now, this is beyond any attempt to control the narrative. It's just like a different level. I've never come across anything absurd as this before, and also it's desperate and it's really lazy. It doesn't make any sense that you do this now after 11 weeks of it. But let's get on to another story before we get into the meat and potatoes of the show. Now, in the US, American Airlines have been accused of anti-smellitism after the overpowering body odour of Yossi and Jenny Adler caused the airline to ask them to leave the plane, stating that it was an emergency, right? So they told these two it was an emergency because they stunk, right? They wanted them off the plane. However, the rest of the passengers were left seated and the plane took off without them. The smell was so strong that even the pilot complained. The couple claimed that they were kicked off for religious reasons, as the airline staff at first believed their odour was down to religious practices. They were put in a hotel with a shower and put on a plane the next morning. So we're going to talk about the new Stasi now, and especially the climate change agenda, which is bringing in the new totalitarianism as we speak, and is featured every day in the repeater pathetic mainstream media outlets, ones that we actually mention quite a lot, such as The Guardian. So welcome all those ostracised, all of you people out there are ostracised by the new Stasi in the US and UK, along with, of course, many other parts of the world, those who are starting to see through the thin veil of mediocre propaganda, which presents itself as the voice of the people through the lobbyists for, guess what? Yes, totalitarianism. So welcome everybody, because we're going to be covering this on tonight's show, and we do cover it in quite a lot of depth most weeks, actually, in different aspects. So first question is propaganda failing? The Yellow Vests may have their controlled opposition and agent provocateurs embedded, but it's not them who've ripped down 60% of French speed cameras. Now, that's something that the the red scarves will probably be bringing up, saying that this is an affront to democracy and law and order by ripping down speed cameras. But in the UK, the war on freedom of movement gets worse by the week. Every day, the Global Action Plan edges nearer to its totalitarian completion with endless anti-car stories. Now, this is incredible, right? These anti-car stories have been really escalating, and I don't think there's a day where one of the rags like The Guardian doesn't publish one or two stories on this. Obviously, it's Agenda 21. They want to get cars off the road. They want to close down the roads. They want everybody in high-density cities using public transport. And if anyone thinks that's a conspiracy theory, look how many huge developments are being built around railway stations. That's the idea. That's in the Global Action Plan. So does anyone really believe, now this is a good point, that the new breed of cars and the extreme emissions tests in the UK mean that pollution is worse than ever? Now, this is a really important point, because I think that these emission tests are so strict now that cars have never been cleaner, and we know this. And of course, the diesel engines, they were really clean. Recent diesel engines, much cleaner, but now they've got to go because of the particulates, and so everyone has to buy a diesel car. Then they say you have to get rid of it. Low emission zone, ultra low emission zone coming in London, which is going to make it impossible for a lot of people, which is obviously what is needed to get people off the road. They can't just say that you're not allowed to drive. They've got to make it impossible. So the new vehicles are hardly pushing out any emissions. And the days of London smog, they're like some kind of Dickensian tale now, aren't they? When you look at these sort of stories from the 50s, when you had this heavy pollution in London, and there's no pollution now. Well, I'd like to say there's very little, let's put it that way. But we're still being told that thousands of people are dying prematurely every year because of the traffic in London. Now, this is very clearly not the case to anyone with a memory. And of course, where do they get these statistics from? Premature deaths from pollution. I mean, it's never really backed up with any detail. So the traffic, as far as I can see, in London peaked in the 90s. That's what I can remember, because I remember when I was using a car more then, I was actually in traffic jams a lot of the time because I was travelling up and down the country. And I noticed that the congestion in London was much worse in the 90s. I don't know whether anyone else out there can back that up or maybe even contradict it, but that's my recollection. So aided and abetted by so-called liberals, or in reality, let's call them extremists, who repeat the PR coming out of the TVs and all other forms of media, how would The Guardian keep going without its fairy stories about an impending catastrophe facing the world because of CO2 and rising sea levels, all brought to you courtesy of the PR agencies relied on by the worthless scribblers who repeat and get this, not one fact and no research in these articles that I've been looking at. And I've been reading them for years, these ones like in The Guardian especially. The Guardian is merely a lobbying group for the IPCC, really. And of course, the Global Action Plan and maximum taxation. So these ridiculous claims by the UN lobbying group, the IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, of course, we had 15-year-old Asperger's Greta Thunberg, who's been used as a sort of puppet to spout all this stuff. That basically, she reads out Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change press releases and says we've got to do something about it now and the world's dying. And they've got this 15-year-old now giving speeches at the World Economic Forum in Davos after actually making her address at the recent climate change conference. And this is incredible. And also it's a form of abuse, in my opinion, that they've got this 15-year-old kid with Asperger's being made to read these scripts like an actress, and I think one of her parents is an actor, the other's an opera singer. So this kid's really just a theatrical kid who's been pushed into being a lobbyist for the UN. I mean, how cynical can you get? You know, it's incredible. Now, these claims, let's say these claims like those of any extinction apocalypse cult, are not only absurd, but repeated by every fake media news outlet on the doomed planet, which is by conventional estimates, 4.5 billion years old. Let's get that bit in. So the planet is 4.5 billion years old. And you get these people who are about 50 and 60 and saying, well, I've been on the planet for 50 and 60 years and climate change has never been so bad. And they just haven't got a clue what they're talking about, because we're talking about systems that have been going on for billions of years. And of course, any sort of rise in temperature has to be measured, and measured over a long period of time. And once you start looking at the historical data, then it starts to get into a bit more perspective, but none of these people do that. So basically, my point is here, yeah, if there's an extinction, there have to be survivors, just like in the films, don't there? So thanks for this to David Daniel sent me this, right? It's an email about our previous show, and we're talking about people who were prepping for Brexit, basically stockpiling loads of food because they think that there's going to be no food after Brexit, right? So preppers and Brexit. This is thanks to David Daniel. He says, I know some people that are very much into prepping and the survivalist world. One of them is an ex-police officer, and they were approached by the Biased Broadcasting Corporation, or the BBC and Channel 4, etc. But because they wouldn't go along with their narrative of panic, everybody panic, no deal Brexit story that they wanted to portray on the programme, they were not allowed to appear. Now that's typical awful propaganda, says David. Absolutely true. Yeah, I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? Because you've got these documentaries and they have to have one clear point which they keep berating people with, and they don't even have any opposing views in them. So it's typical, and reality TV docu-fantasies require there to be no deviations from the basic premise, just repeating the same point over and over again with different talking heads and a narrator to keep pushing home the agenda in case anyone misses it. Now, let's move on quickly to situation comedy, right? Now, the controlled opposition, globalist anti-globalists, also known as Extinction Rebellion, who claim they have the backing of 100 academics and the Archbishop of Canterbury, well, for what that's worth, with the stuff that he comes out with, refused to leave a public tour of the Scottish Parliament. So basically, it sounds like they paid to go in on this tour, and then they've actually done their usual thing of lie down or say, we demand urgent change on climate change now, to a load of bemused tourists, and they've done that in the Scottish Parliament. So they're ramping up their sit-down protests, but the Extinction Rebellion corporate globalist-backed anti-globalist cult reached a new peak of hilarity this week as the ER team premiered what looks like a new cult musical led by an evangelical reverend called Billy in New York. Now, this looks like the rehearsals for a cult comedy musical, but it's actually backing Extinction Rebellion. You just couldn't make it up. Now, go to YouTube and look at the ER, the Extinction Rebellion channel, and search this title, Extinction Rebellion in New York City, Reverend Billy and Choir. Now, the Reverend leads a congregation with some great new catchphrases to worship the earth. I mean, this is incredible, right? So basically, he's coined these two phrases, which I think are brilliant, and he's getting them to repeat them. Gaialuya, referring to Gaia, the earth. So he's got Gaialuya. And if that's too esoteric, what about Earthaluya? I mean, it's just incredible, this, right? The congregation are actually holding up a large cardboard snail. Well, obviously, cardboard snails are an endangered species, aren't they? And the plot to this new musical, this is the only thing I can glean from it, is that the cult members have lost the plot and have 12 years to find it before the end of the world, which brings in, obviously, the contributions of Greta Thunberg. So maybe they could get in her as some kind of narrator, and that would really please her theatrical parents, you know, that she got involved in the cult music Extinction Rebellion. Now, in actual fact, I think this would be really successful, and it could be more successful than the Rocky Horror Show, better premise, Little Shop of Horrors, or even Saucy Jack and the Space Vixens. I think it's got better premise than any of those three. With a little work, it could be massive, this. So we're in the post-truth era now, there's no doubt about it. And facts can never get in the way of a good story. So this should be a tremendous hit, in my opinion, right? So the time is right for Extinction Rebellion versus Common Sense, led by Reverend Billy. Now, the cult does have a sinister side, like all cults do. This is Extinction Rebellion I'm talking about here. And they have members who call themselves, get this, dragons. Right? Now, in some correspondence to somebody who's contributed this information to the show and set up an email list with all the people from Extinction Rebellion and their mentors and co-workers, shall we say, it involved everybody in this email list. There are emails coming back from people with names like Dragon Echo and Dragon Tango. Now that sounds a little bit like the police, doesn't it? But this environmentalist friend of ours, who actually dared to question their hierarchy and make some valid points, was sent threatening emails, which we will be putting out into a report over the coming weeks, because this is incredible stuff, and it shows what's really happening with this Extinction Rebellion, this globalist-backed anti-globalist cult. So basically the globalists need their anti-globalists, and they don't come any more corporate than these people. Now, interestingly, they're asking for general assemblies, consensus meetings and silly titles which mirror the corporate takeover of Occupy and the state-backed protest agenda pretty much exactly. But the most interesting point was that the Extinction Rebellion cult leader, Gail Bradbrook, asked to be taken off the email list, which was started by this environmentalist friend of ours, who was once a regional director of Friends of the Earth, until it became quite clear that Friends of the Earth was a corporate-sponsored lobbying organisation for the state-backed fake environmentalism, which has hoodwinked so many for so long. So that's absolutely incredible, all that. So Extinction Rebellion, the musical, and this email list combined give a great insight into what's actually going on with this lot. But there's a comedy side and there's a sinister side, and there were some threats made to a friend of ours, and basically saying that he didn't understand who he was dealing with. That was one of the dragons, you know. Could it have been Dragon Foxtrot or Dragon Echo? I can't remember now, but we have got it all logged. So next up, thanks to Anna Stormcrow on Facebook, who has found connections through a company called This Ain't Rock and Roll Limited to Extinction Rebellion people, right? And one of its directors, particularly Charlie Waterhouse, who's responsible for the ER logo, and companies such as Aqueduct Design and Advertising Limited, Brighton Directors, which are linked to Civica, which has on its board actually Brighton Directors. So we've got this connection to Civica. Now, if you look at this Extinction Rebellion, there's these corporate connections absolutely everywhere going all the way through it. And of course, Gail Bradbrook is linked through Citizens Online to the 5G rollout and all of that stuff. And if you look at that, it's all on our website. Look at Extinction Rebellion, fake protest. And we've got a follow-up to that, which is all about fake protests. So go to windowsontheworld.net and look through that, and you'll find some really interesting stuff, including the spreadsheets of how much these people are getting paid. One of them wants 500 quid a day because, he's a consultant and he's used to getting that much for what? So he's going to get $2,000 a month for 2 days work a week. That's 8 days for $2,000 a month for Extinction Rebellion. Now, what could you possibly do that would be worth $2,000? Because all this they do is go and lie in the road and basically make a nuisance of themselves and get arrested with the cooperation of the police, it seems. So they claim their environment and public management safety systems, right? This is Civica. Let's get onto this. This is really interesting. Civica are involved with collecting fines. Remember this, for local authorities. They're involved with government and national security, social housing management, public safety, and our environment and public safety management. They have a section on their website for that. They claim their environment and public management safety systems are used to safeguard people and their local communities. I mean, you couldn't make up how interconnected this cult really is. It carries on. This is Civica, who are actually linked in really through this Charlie Waterhouse to Extinction Rebellion through these companies, right? It carries on. We provide a range of specialist software to manage and improve public safety, regulatory and law enforcement activities, from automatic number plate recognition to the licensing of businesses and individuals, and fines and enforcement. So the enforcement of fines, and also the enforcement of payment of council tax. This is an external body, Civica, that gets involved with enforcing fines and payment for council tax also. Now, these are used, it says, by 90% of UK police and fire services, right, this is Civica, together with more than 200 local authorities to safeguard people and communities. Our applications are designed specifically for the sector, underpinned by expertise in mobile working, secure communications and geographic information systems. Now this ties into all this stuff we talk about with surveillance. For instance, these data mapping companies which we've featured on recent shows, which are working in partnership, say, with companies like Crime Stoppers to map what's happening in real time and create algorithms which can be monitored and obviously pushed into sections of social media where things may be happening, and controlling the narrative on social media. And get this, this is what Civica say: we're committed to turning digital vision into reality, such as helping the police service of Northern Ireland to modernise services via centralised contact centres and providing secure system access to improved sharing and collaboration for 61,000 users across UK police forces. So, carrying on, this is the Extinction Rebellion connection here. The Civica, and this is Civica we're talking about, they supply 90% of UK police and fire services, 1 million automatic number plate checks daily for West Yorkshire Police, and systems for 200 local regulatory services. Now this is like Big Brother on steroids. No wonder their self-appointed publicly funded agents refer to themselves as Foxtrot Tango and Foxtrot Echo. I mean, this is like a dystopian sci-fi thriller, as well as, of course, as a cult musical. Now, making knowledge accessible across 90 police organisations, the Police Online Knowledge Area is a secure online space for the policing community to share knowledge and collaborate on new ways of working. And this is Civica, okay? We're linked into Extinction Rebellion. So this is incredible. We're definitely in the post-truth world if they think that people are going to fall for this. Well, people are falling for it, aren't they? Because they don't do any research. Now, the Civica-built online collaboration system supports speedy problem solving through access to specific professional expertise. This, plus the other links we have already covered with the connections to 5G through Citizens Online and the payroll of these professional corporate sponsored and paid for opportunities. Yeah, they're actually involved in the rollout of 5G through Citizens Online. And just check all that out. We've got all the links in that article and those shows on windowsontheworld.net about Extinction Rebellion. Now, this is interesting as well, right? Several years ago, I reported on a website which was launching hate attacks against myself and others whilst I was at the People's Voice TV. And I found out the website, the one that was inciting hatred against myself and others, was run by a company owned by someone who'd approached me outside a court case, right? And had met up for a drink with him and his business partner, who stated to a friend of mine who was talking to him that he'd worked for French military intelligence. I also found out the website that had been attacking me was owned by a company owned by guess who? Yes, the two I'd gone to meet up with. This is where Companies House comes in really, really handy. And so that's how it all ties together. Once you start looking at these surveillance operations and see us involved with them, and we've just made that connection with the Extinction Rebellion mob, then it gets quite interesting. So when I called them out on it, they went a bit quiet and I never heard from them again. But they were also involved with voice over internet protocol phones. So this is almost like a repeat of that, really. It's kind of surveillance going on. And it's absolutely in your face. They're not hiding anything. But when I called them out, yeah, they did go a bit quiet. They were also involved in supplying these voice over internet phones through a company. And Yeah, you couldn't make this stuff up, really, but the revelation that ER is connected with the surveillance state and intelligence gathering should come as no surprise. But what is astonishing is that no one following them has even looked into the people who are leading them or even questioned the sort of flawed data on which they claim to rely upon, which is the SR15 IPCC special report, which contains not one fact. But this is the incredible thing. When you go up and talk to these people about it, you talk to the thing that they're supporting, they actually don't know anything about it at all. And the revelation that ER, Extinction Rebellion, is connected with the surveillance state and intelligence gathering shouldn't come as any surprise. So moving swiftly on here. Meanwhile, let's not forget that WikiLeaks announced recently that it will commence its lawsuit against The Guardian over an entirely fabricated story that former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort held secret meetings with Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy, a report which has been largely discredited. It was absolutely untrue. WikiLeaks fund now to sue The Guardian stands at $50,000. So please contribute to that, because it would be great to get rid of them for once and for all, wouldn't it? They say thanks to all 1,270 donors so far. Legal action will now commence, it says, but more is required to complete it. So do make a contribution to that. But Paul Manafort states, this story is totally false and deliberately libelous. I've never met Julian Assange or anyone connected with him. I've never been contacted by anyone connected to WikiLeaks, either directly or indirectly. This is good news, and I hope will set a precedent that fake news outlets can be sued by the public through crowdfunding. What a great idea. When they put out fake news, bring cases against them for libel or defamation. And basically, then they could be shut down by crowdfunding. That would be great. It would also be great to call them out on a number of their fake stories at once and use the tactics of those who attack the real truth outlets and calling them conspiracy theorists. So that would be great, actually bringing libel cases on numerous fronts at the same time to completely shut them down. Or is this just wishful thinking on my behalf, But if that's not bad enough, what about this, yeah? We talk about change agents. Well, there's actually a website called changeagents.org.uk, and they state on there, we have partnered with Know You More, a social enterprise that offers early careerists professional coaching, giving you the opportunity to develop your future today. So what is coaching? It says. This is changeagents.org.uk. Now, this is just incredible, right? Because we talk about change agents all the time and how they're mentored in the public and the private sector through organisations such as Unlimited and things like Locality and Intentionality. I think that one's gone, but they're all under umbrella organisations like Power to Change. You start looking up these things and they're all interlinked and funded by the same people. But this is great on their website. They say, what is coaching? What is coaching to be a change agent? And what it actually is reiterating the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. That's what it is, which is what I've said it always was. But it's great to have it backed up from the source itself. It says professional coaching is regarded as the highest level of personal development. It is a one-to-one relationship, most effective during times of transition. Would that be transition leading to change? Its many benefits include resilience and confidence. You will be paired with a coach who over a period of 3 months will use observation, questioning, listening and feedback to create a conversation rich in insight. You will develop a greater clarity and appreciation of your own circumstances and create new ways to approach challenges and achieve goals. It's called absolute brainwashing through repetition of these sustainable development goals of the UN. In other words, you repeat what you're told and you get mentored into these goals, and that's the main purpose of changeagents.org.uk. Look that one up. Of course, there are many agencies of change reaching out into this whole area, of NGOs, charities and social enterprises, all pushing one agenda, the Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 Global Action Plan implemented at a local level. We talk about quite a lot, and we've done loads of shows on that, and the whole regeneration of London and the rest of the UK, gentrification, it's all covered in there, and in our talks, the bigger picture. Do book a talk, actually, The bigger picture is available with myself, Piers Corbyn, and Sandy Adams. So please do actually get in touch with us through the website and book a talk in your local area. Now, getting on to the next part of the show, we're going to look at Sweden's new leftist government. This is an article and a headline. Sweden's new leftist government stops gender equality authority being scrapped. And this is by Chris Tomlinson. Carries on. The Gender Equality Authority was formed on January the 1st, 2018, and according to the agency's website, the overarching goal of Sweden's national gender equality work is for women and men to have the same power to shape society and their own lives. Well, this is just something you do with your own kind of volition, really, isn't it? It says here, the agency came under criticism last November after it was revealed that 70% of the staff at the agency felt at risk of burning out and falling ill due to a variety of factors, from sleep problems to stress and reports of bullying and harassment. Now, this is a comment from Per in Sweden, who sent this over. The state of affairs in Sweden defies imagination. It's a lunatic asylum in every conceivable way. Let's see what Danish MP Pia Karsgaard has to say about their neighbouring country. Right, now this is really funny. I quote from Danish newspaper, right, Den Kort Avis, this is the name of the newspaper, and this is Pia Karsgaard, the MP, the Danish MP. This is a quote. The only relevant question is how precisely to characterise Sweden. Personally, I do not believe the right concept or terminology has been invented yet. Sweden is so insane that it differs from every other country in history, every other society in history, in fact. Establishing a concept is probably not a job for political science, but rather for psychiatric professionals that have specialised in schizophrenia and emotional suppression. Well, that's a very sensible thing to say in response to this diversity and equity and all the rest of it, and the buzzwords that are going on, the psychological society. Well, the future looks bright for the rest of us then, because this is the model being rolled out across the world. So the newly formed left liberal Swedish government, led by the Social Democrats, has announced it will no longer be scrapping the country's Gender Equality Authority. Despite an announcement made last month, the agency was planned to be shut down this year after an announcement in December following the passage of a budget created by the Conservative Christian Democrats with the Moderate Party. But it's now been rescued by the new coalition government of Prime Minister Stefan Löfven. This is an SVT report, television report. Löfven announced the rescue of the agency, which has around 60 employees, on Monday, saying, "We are a feminist government. The Equality Authority remains. The rights of LGBTQ people are strengthened. The Anti-Discrimination Act is tightened." So, yeah, this is the model that's being rolled out everywhere, so get ready for it. And I think we are pretty much there in the UK as far as this goes, and as far as the subversion. Look at our show, actually, the Transgender Agenda, with Sandy Adams there, and she says some really interesting things about that. Next up, Big Tech merging with Big Brother is a big problem, by David Samuels. The creation of intelligence community GovCloud should send a chill up the spine of anyone who understands how powerful these systems can be and how inherently resistant they are to traditional forms of oversight, whose own track record can be charitably described as poor. Well, this is the thing. I mean, all of this data that they're gathering, what they're actually going to do with it all, that's another point now. It carries on with so many pots of gold waiting at the end of the Washington, D.C. rainbow. It seems like a small matter for tech companies to turn over our personal data, which legally speaking is actually their data. This is the important thing, because once you sign up for any of this stuff and any of these social media, you're basically giving access and the rights to everything that you've put on there. And they're basically giving it to the spy agencies that guarantee their profits. This is the threat that is now emerging in plain sight, it says. It is something we should reckon with now before it's too late. In fact, Big Tech and the surveillance agencies are already partners. According to a 2016 report by Reuters, Yahoo designed custom software to filter its users' emails and deliver messages that triggered a set of search terms to the NSA. Now, we've known this stuff happens for years. I mean, I've known about this for ages, And this goes way beyond just picking up keywords for advertising and what you're putting into your searches. I mean, incredible stuff, but what are they actually going to do with it all? I mean, unless you become completely targeted for some reason or another. But this ties into what we've been talking about during the show. There's an interesting article here on Zero Hedge. Carries on. As bad as things have been for Facebook since the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke 1 year ago, one team of researchers led by a former peer of Mark Zuckerberg at Harvard, who creates one of the original Facebook prototypes, thinks the reality of the company's circumstances is even more dire than investors realise. That's interesting. In a report published Thursday by Plain Sight, an independent research shop led by Aaron Greenspan, analysts calculate that Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg has been regularly lying to investors and the public about the company's user metrics, and that the company could be overestimating the number of users by as much as 50%. Now that's incredible, isn't it? That's absolutely incredible. The team detailed their findings in a 70-page report published on their website. It says Facebook has been lying to the public about the scale of its problem with fake accounts, which likely exceed 50% of its network. Its official metrics, many of which it has stopped reporting quarterly, are self-contradictory and even partial. The company has lost control of its own product. Ultimately, this is just the latest sign that Facebook, formerly one of the world's most successful companies, is doomed to go the way of CompuServe and AOL. Well, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Here's the next article on the agenda for tonight. Mainstream media is literally making people sick. This is by Caitlin Johnston. A new updated dataset is now available on a psychological phenomenon that has been labelled Trump anxiety disorder or Trump hypersensitive unexplained disorder, and it says that the phenomenon only got worse in 2018. Well, this is kind of incredible, but it's not when you see what's been coming through your television screens and the likes of Antifa, or if you've ever been to any of these rallies. I mean, this is an actual real thing, you know. People are actually getting Trump anxiety disorder. But it carries on. Pacific Standard and its growing body of research ignore the most obvious and significant culprit behind this phenomenon, which is tearing people's health to shreds. The mass media, which has been deliberately fanning the flames of Trump panic. Propaganda. It's the most overlooked and underappreciated aspect of human society. Well, not for the people who listen to this show. I mean, most people who listen to Windows on the World know all about the power of propaganda, because it's something that is one of the most important things we talk about. The ability of those in power to manipulate the ways ordinary people think, act and vote has allowed for an inverted totalitarianism, which turns the citizenry into their own prison wardens, allowing those with real power to continue doing as they please, unhindered by the interests of the common man. Yeah, that's very true, that. So we're now going to get on to climate change. Fanatics can't explain record snowfalls or evidence of life under the South Pole, it says here. This is the third year in a row that the Northern Hemisphere has seen record snowfalls. In April 2018, for example, it was reported that Billings, Montana had had the snowiest winter on record. Weather records in Billings date back to 1934. So it carries on. Record cold and snow destroy global warming claims. Yeah, this is Energy and Environment. Basically, James Taylor, the contributor to this website. So it says, yet another bitterly cold, snowy winter is destroying alarmist global warming claims, proving once again that over-the-top global warming predictions are proving no more scientifically credible than snake oil. This morning's stunning photos show New England lobster boats frozen in port, looking like they're stranded deep within the Arctic Circle. Well, this is going on in Britain as well. I mean, it's apparently freezing there now. I'm not in the UK, but you could say that this is a global phenomenon. It says Connecticut is experiencing its coldest February in recorded history. So is Michigan, so is Toronto. Cleveland and Chicago are experiencing their second coldest February in recorded history. Frigid and record cold temperatures are being set from Key West to International Falls at the same time. Blizzard after blizzard is burying much of the nation with record winter snow totals, with winter snowfall records being set from Boston to Denver. So there you go. Bitter cold and snowfall records shatter global warming claims. Global warming activists are in full throttle damage control, desperately claiming global warming causes record snow and cold. Yeah, this is the new narrative, and you see this in paper. I think the BBC did a report on this the other day, that basically snow was a result of global warming. Carries on. The Centre for American Progress claimed climate change may have affected the Boston snowstorm, may have made it more likely, may have made it worse than it would have been without so much greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. National Geographic published an article titled Blizzard of Nor'easters. No surprise, it's all thanks to climate change. Yeah, no surprise there whatsoever. Now, I'm going to get onto this again in the same ilk and area. This is from Barbara McKenzie, who posted this. In 2013, quite a few years ago now, Dr. David Keir, one of New Zealand's top scientists, set out his views on the Globalist Climate Project, describing his experience with the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the demonisation by global warmers of the essential and innocent gas carbon dioxide. Now, this is interesting, actually, because I don't think I've come across this report before. It's got top New Zealand scientist describes global warming as pseudoscience. The widespread obsession with global warming climate change in opposition to all factual evidence is quite incredible by Dr. David Keir. Now, he's a former Director General of New Zealand's Department of Scientific and Industrial Research. As such, he would have been considered one of New Zealand's top scientists. Now, this is what you find. You find people who've actually worked for the IPCC and actually had or had top jobs within government are now turning against it. But of course, all as we hear are the voices of the paid lobbyists. So he's been publishing on sea levels since the 1950s, a little bit like Niels Axel Morner, who also prepared documents for the IPCC before they started telling porkies, basically. Also Martin Hovland, who we've interviewed, who's into ocean floor research, which is all about the volcanoes, which aren't really taken into account by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the UN. As far as heating of the planet and the ocean goes. It's incredible, isn't it, that you wouldn't take that into consideration. But Martin Hovland is actually contributing to the new IPCC document, and he said it's doom, doom and more gloom, as usual, of course, but no fact, a fact-free zone. Carries on here. In 2013, Dr. Keir prepared a booklet in which he set out his views on the Globalist Climate Project. In the booklet, Dr. Keir describes his experience with the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the corrupted science behind the global warming narrative, the corrupted science behind the claims of rising sea levels, etc., demonisation of global warmers, and of the essential and innocent gas carbon dioxide, and more importantly, how councils are making zoning and other decisions purely to satisfy a false narrative with total disregard for the facts. Now, this really ties into what we talk about in the bigger picture, global to local, the whole way that this is all about a taxation and control agenda, taxation and control of population. Think globally, act locally. Well, that's one of the things that we keep reiterating that they're doing. And this is coming from Dr. David Keir from 2013. He describes how local councils are ignoring scientific fact in order to satisfy an agenda imposed on them from above, yet by the UN through ICLEI, which is Local Government for Sustainable Development. No matter if scientists, engineers and local observers all indicate that the sea is not rising, even retreating, once a council has decided on a policy that it assumes that the sea is rising. Well, that's it, you see. It's just repetition, repetition and more repetition. The council is immovable and it makes decisions on zoning and building codes on that basis. Cue the repeaters have been trained into the agenda to spread it. We're talking here, of course, about what we were talking about earlier on in the show, changeagents.org.uk, who are implementing this stuff into your local government. Yes, globalist warming 101 for the future leader, the social entrepreneur and the useful idiot. That's what we're talking about here. Sustainable Development Goals, solving the world's problem in a sustainable way. Change Agents UK plays a key role. Yeah, so that's it, you see. It brings us back to the changeagents.org.uk. A major network of leading companies, think tanks, charities, universities, all the stuff we talk about, trade unions and professional bodies, has reached an important milestone in measuring the UK's performance against the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Organisations including the World Wildlife Fund, UK, Good Energy and the Open University, this is where Extinction Rebellion starts to get tied into it as well, because the UK stakeholders for sustainable development. This is all tied into it. So what this guy's saying, this Dr. Keir, is absolutely spot on true and exactly ties into the things that we talk about week in, week out, which is why I'm putting it on air, really. Carrying on with Dr. Keir's report, such policies will be being applied in coastal and non-coastal areas. Like now, look at our show on coastal areas under threat, coastal communities under threat with Niels Axel Morner, where he actually offered, as an expert in sea levels, to go into court and say there is no need for managed retreat. In other words, the sea levels aren't going to rise so much that you're going to have to move out of this small village called Fairburn, which is obviously going to be some kind of UN Agenda 21 type nature reserve. And we actually found out that Lloyd's of London would underwrite the property there, or we were told that someone from Lloyd's of London would. So that is another thing that people can take up if they are being basically kicked out of their local areas. Then they can actually get their buildings underwritten, and even in these places that are being classified as uninhabitable. That's a big part of UN Agenda 21. But such policies will be being applied in coastal and non-coastal areas, thereby contributing to fulfilment of Agenda 21 goals of eventually eliminating small towns and villages and moving people to sustainable megacities. Yes, that's exactly what this show was about at the very beginning. Despite being a global agenda, the implementation of the goals implies nationally adaptable, resource-conserving policies and activities carefully tailored to the cultural uniqueness of each part of the country. In other words, rationing, restriction of movement and access to what was previously public also being restricted. And this is happening all over. They're starting to create these little reserves and wetlands, basically fencing off public land. Land that was accessible from all angles before has now got fences around it and gates. Very interesting. And look at the boroughs where that's happening in London. Just start checking it out and you'll start to see the pattern emerging, the pattern that we talk about very regularly. Basically, the public being restricted, lots of happy clappy fake cultural diversity. This is what is sold on the back of, which is just the bringing together of a monoculture with fluffy references to diversity, which mean monotony and no choice. Yes, so there you go. How Dr. Keir and others know all, how did they know it was going to happen, basically? Well, we have also been banging on about it for years, and he knew it was happening because he was a contributor to the policy documents, and he's been working in government. Now, Dr. Keir's text is reproduced in its entirety, and it's worth looking that up. Dr. David Keir. Just check out his article, which we've been referring to here. There's so much information in there, and it's great to use when you're dealing with people who are into the cult of climate change, the global warming religion. And he actually states at the beginning of this article, global warming, alias climate change, the non-existent, incredibly expensive threat to us all, including to our grandchildren, by Dr. David Keir, 34 West End, Ohope, Watakane, New Zealand, former Director General of New Zealand DSIR, United Nations consultants and South Pacific geoscientist. Well, he should know a bit, you see. Let's just get into the introduction of this. I think everyone should look at this document now. Climate change has become an important international topic. One might almost say a religion. It began life as global warming. So very many people, including politicians and news people, appear to have been overwhelmed by it. Well, isn't that just the truth? And have led others to believe and follow the doctrine. It has sponsored a good deal of international cooperation, which can only have been good. However, the cost of combating carbon, in inverted commas, has been extremely high, and the debt and economic consequences are being passed on to present citizens, and worse still, to future generations, including all our grandchildren. The booklet attempts to raise in citizens' minds questions regarding the enormous sums of money and effort being wasted on this topic. Remember, this was written in 2013. The booklet suggests that global warming alias climate change as proposed by global warmers makes no sense. You as the reader must judge that for yourself, it says here, not to help the writer of this booklet, but to help you and your family. Now, this is interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of these people, scientists who've been involved with this and seen it, they are absolutely overwhelmed with the desire to tell everyone about it because they know what's coming, because they've seen it from the inside. And those are the sort of people that we need more and more of. And those are the sort of people that we need to get Extinction Rebellion to meet face to face and debate if that's possible. Now, well, as we know, these people do not like debate and they do not like argument. So that is a bit of a problem. Let's carry on with this for a bit. The ancient acceptable view. Our Earth's climate is highly variable, and records show clearly that it always has been so. Animals and plants have had no option but to accept what comes and to adapt life in ways that suit it best. Evolution gave some help by introducing the survival of the fittest. Well, I don't go along with that bit, but that's just one line in the document. Humans found early that their discussions and understanding were helped by a belief in some extraneous source being the cause of recorded changes of climate, perhaps with divine power. So his booklet uses Mother Nature in that role to avoid wordy explanations. That's very interesting, isn't it? So basically he's going into the wider view of Earth's planetary systems here. The new belief, the new problem goes on. That ancient and acceptable view was amended in the minds of some people who I call global warmers. I've heard nothing convincing about their so-called science, but what they publish convinces me that it's close to nonsense. The most convincing evidence against it comes mostly from the global warmers themselves. It's very true, that, isn't it? Because once you start arguing with people, you realise they have no argument. In this booklet, the beliefs of global warming and climate change have initial capital letters. That contrasts with natural warming or natural changing of climate, which all have lowercase. So global warming is stated as though it is actually a real thing and it deserves uppercase lettering. That's actually a very good point. The idea of a human cause is much less than 300 years old. Yeah, a lot of this started out with things like the noosphere and all these strange ideas that came out of the New Age and into the cult of climate change, because the New Age movement has been absolutely hijacked into climate change. So it says here, most interest then was about the rate of sea level rise as the Earth warmed following the Little Ice Age. This is what the previous idea of it was all about. That cool period from about 1500 to 1700 AD halted winemaking in England and taro cropping in New Zealand. Our group determined the rate of sea level rise in many different world regions from widely available readings of tide gauges, which are less variable than those of thermometers. The average for us all was 125 millimetres a century. Hence, it would take 8 centuries for sea level to rise 1 metre. No serious threat to us. Now, this is incredibly important because all of this UN IPCC data relies on the fact that there's going to be these massive rises in sea levels, like, you know, New York Harbour's going to be under 2 metres of water and all this sort of stuff. Well, the way they measure New York Harbour is with these new developments which are actually sinking. So there's all sorts of problems going on. And also this SR15 document was using weather stations, some of which didn't exist and some of which had now become part of big urban areas, which would make them a lot warmer. Some of these posts were also embedded into concrete, and of course the concrete heats up, making them warmer. So these are basic errors that they're making, just very basic errors. So he says, subsequently I attended many international science conferences representing DSAR, New Zealand or Pacific nations. I noted the words global warming appearing increasingly in paper titles and sensed a growing number of adherents. Those later Those latter arranged the first ever conference on global warming in Vienna in 1985. Unlike most such meetings where a communique summarising achievements was released on the final day, the full results of this one were delayed for over 2 years, obviously because they had to get what they wanted. Well, when they did appear, it was 2 days before Christmas in 1987. A world declaration included overseas scientists have estimated that the seas around New Zealand will rise up to 1.4 metres in the next 40 years. That article concentrated on the massive consequent problems caused by our carbon dioxide emissions, but gave no adequate support in evidence. Oh, surprise, surprise. Knock me down with a feather. That rate of rise was equivalent to 3,500 millimetres a century, 28 times faster than our 125 millimetres. It's incredible, isn't it? This is just absolutely incredible, and it's scientific fraud to such a degree that you couldn't make it up, but they do. Hence, we stupidly ignored it, thinking no one could possibly believe it. But the world did believe, and the global warming mirage was born. Had 3,500 been true, sea level should have risen by almost 1 metre by today. It hasn't, not even closely. So that's absolutely a key point and a great way of arguing with people, because all of this stuff is about mitigating and using taxpayer money through global carbon taxation to mitigate things that won't happen. They never happened and they never will happen. So it carries on. This showed unambiguously that those overseas scientists were not true scientists. They ignored a most important basic rule of true science: thou shalt not publish science without first checking it. A check against local tide gauges would have shown how wrong 1.4 metres in 40 years was. They simply hadn't bothered to check. That was a first grave error. So for more on this, go to the SR15, the Special Report 15, United Nations summary document. You don't have to read the whole thing, because the summary report has most of this information in. And basically, read it and use it when you have to, because there are no facts in there. So these people who are relying on that we have to do something in 12 years, and using a 15-year-old kid with Asperger's at the World Economic Forum in Davos to push more taxation is just slightly cynical, really, isn't it? He carries on anyway, fooling the world. The global warmers persisted with their use of pseudoscience and made further predictions. Understandably, they too all proved wrong. At conferences I began to hear, regardless of the science involved, when a speaker wished to rubbish some scientific idea or research, he or she stated the conclusion firmly and followed by it. In other words, that 97% of scientists agree, basically. Carries on just like global warming. Yeah, exactly. Clearly, the global warmers heard that too. They didn't change their pseudoscience, but cleverly changed the name to climate change. Obviously, one can disprove warming, but the words change of climate can't be proved wrong. The United Nations became interested. This is how it all started. Major sea level rise could cause havoc in low-lying areas or island groups. They established an intergovernmental panel for climate change, the IPCC, and invited nations to send delegates. Not surprisingly, those chosen were almost entirely global warmers, because they clearly knew something about it. But to do them credit, the panel members acted a little more like true scientists than those earlier. They accepted that 1.4 metres in 40 years was wrong and re-evaluated it as 0.49 metres by 2100, which is a century ahead. Thus they dropped 3,500 down to 500 in a century. This is a bit like the 2 degrees coming down to 1.5 degrees, because we're going to be extinct if it's 1.5, if it goes above 1.5 degrees now. None of this stuff can be measured. And previously you had people like Vivienne Westwood saying, well, if it goes above 3 degrees, then we go into climate catastrophe. Absolutely incredible. The cause remained unchanged: our CO2 emissions to the atmosphere. In no other human activity would those involved retain a belief when the most crucial item involved was found to be 86% wrong by themselves, by their own calculations. That was a second grave error, he says. That's absolutely incredible. I think everyone should actually read that paper by Dr. David Keir. Thanks for Barbara McKenzie for forwarding that. And that's going to be about